Your spirit doesn't feel the flames. That's what Seth told a devastated mother who couldn't sleep, haunted by images of her son's cremation. But his next statement left everyone speechless. The consciousness experiences something far more significant than physical sensation during this process. For over 2 decades, Seth, speaking through Jane Roberts in documented trance sessions, provided insight no living person could access. As a non-physical entity, he offered perspectives from beyond death itself, with thousands of recorded sessions demonstrating remarkable consistency and accuracy. What Seth revealed about cremation challenged everything we thought we knew. He described 3 critical discoveries: how consciousness actually separates from physical matter, why the timing of cremation creates unexpected spiritual opportunities, and most shocking of all, how cremation affects reincarnation patterns in ways that could change your entire perspective on death. The mother's question opened a conversation that would revolutionize thousands of people's understanding of what really happens when we die. What Seth shared next about the spirit's actual experience during cremation will transform how you think about death forever. When people first encounter Seth's teachings about death and consciousness, the immediate question isn't whether his insights are profound. It's how we can trust information from a source that challenges everything we think we know about reality itself. But here's what makes Seth's revelations about cremation so compelling. Unlike every living psychic, medium, or spiritual teacher you've ever heard from, Seth speaks from direct experience of the very realms they can only glimpse. For over 20 years, from 1963 to 1984, Jane Roberts entered a trance state that allowed an entity calling himself Seth to communicate through her. This wasn't your typical channeling session filled with vague platitudes about love and light. Seth delivered complex, multi-layered teachings about the nature of consciousness, reality creation, and the death process that were so internally consistent and philosophically sophisticated that they've influenced generations of consciousness researchers, physicists, and philosophers. What sets Seth apart from living psychics is fundamental. When a medium connects with the spirit world, they're translating experiences from our physical dimension into non-physical realms. They're essentially tourists with limited visa access, catching glimpses through the veil. Seth, however, claimed to exist permanently in what he called Framework 2, the non-physical dimension, where consciousness operates without the constraints of space, time, or matter. He wasn't visiting these realms, he was speaking from them as his natural habitat. The documentation process behind Seth's teachings is unprecedented in psychic literature. Every single session was audio recorded. Jane's husband, Robert Butts, transcribed every word and took detailed notes about the circumstances surrounding each session. We're talking about thousands of pages of transcripts, cross-referenced and preserved, creating an archive that researchers can examine for consistency, accuracy, and depth. Try finding that level of documentation for any other channeled material. You won't. This meticulous record-keeping revealed something extraordinary. Seth's explanations of consciousness remained perfectly consistent across 2 decades, even when discussing the most complex metaphysical concepts. His descriptions of the death process, the nature of the soul, and what happens to consciousness after physical death never contradicted earlier statements. Instead, they built upon each other with the precision of advanced scientific theory. Seth claimed access to what he termed all that is, essentially the fundamental consciousness from which all reality emerges. From this perspective, he could observe the death process not as something happening to him, but as a natural transition he could witness and explain with stunning clarity. When Seth talks about what happens during cremation, he's not speculating or channeling information second-hand. He's describing process he observed directly from the dimension where consciousness operates after leaving physical form. Modern science has actually begun validating many of Seth's predictions about consciousness research. In the 1970, when Seth described consciousness as existing independently of brain function, neuroscientists considered this impossible. Today, near-death experience research consistently show consciousness continuing during periods of zero brain activity. Seth's descriptions of how consciousness creates reality have found echoes in quantum physics theories about observer effect and the role of consciousness in collapsing wave functions. Dr. Pim van Lommel's groundbreaking research on near-death experiences, published in The Lancet, documented cases of patients with flat EEGs experiencing complex, verifiable consciousness event. These findings align perfectly with Seth's decades-old assertions that consciousness operates independently of physical brain states. When patients reported leaving their bodies during clinical death and observing events they couldn't have known about, they were confirming what Seth had been teaching since the 1960s. The credibility of the Jane Roberts sessions has withstood serious skeptical investigation. Researchers couldn't explain how Jane, with her limited formal education, could produce such sophisticated philosophical and psychological material. The depth of knowledge displayed in Seth's discussions of consciousness, quantum mechanics, and multidimensional reality far exceeded what Jane could have accessed through conventional means. Skeptics tried to debunk the material by finding contradictions or evidence of fraud, but the consistency and complexity of the teachings made this impossible. What makes Seth's cremation revelation particularly significant is that he approaches death from the perspective of someone who has already made the transition. Traditional religious teachings about cremation are based on speculation, cultural beliefs, or theological interpretation. Even the most gifted living psychics can only access glimpses of the death process. Seth, however, describes cremation from the viewpoint of consciousness that exists permanently in the non-physical dimension where the transition occurs. His insights about what happens to awareness during the cremation process shocked even experienced spiritual researchers who thought they understood consciousness and death. Seth revealed aspects of the soul's relationship to the physical body that challenged assumptions held by both religious traditions and metaphysical communities. These weren't gentle, comforting platitudes designed to ease grief. They were precise, technical explanations of how consciousness actually behaves during physical dissolution. The implications of Seth's cremation teachings extend far beyond funeral planning. They reveal fundamental truths about the nature of consciousness, the relationship between soul and body, and what we can expect during our own transition from physical to non-physical existence. For those ready to explore these deeper teachings about consciousness and death, our Insights Academy newsletter provides access to advanced spiritual knowledge that goes beyond what most people are prepared to hear. Plus, subscribers receive a free copy of the Kybalion, the foundational text of Hermetic wisdom. But I should warn you, this information will fundamentally change how you view life and your own spiritual nature. Seth's unique position as a non-physical entity with direct access to the consciousness realms, where death transitions occur, makes his cremation revelations more than just another spiritual opinion. They represent first-hand testimony from the dimension we're all heading toward, delivered through one of the most thoroughly documented and internally consistent bodies of psychic material ever recorded. The question isn't whether you believe in channeled material. The question is whether you're ready to hear what someone who exists permanently in the consciousness realms has observed about what really happens when your body is consumed by flames while your awareness watches from beyond physical form. When Seth first described what he called the 7 stages of death, he wasn't speaking in mystical generalities. He was mapping out a precise process that every consciousness experiences when leaving physical form. And what he revealed about cremation's role in this journey challenges everything we've been taught about death. Let me walk you through these stages exactly as Seth explained them, because understanding this process changes everything about how we view end-of-life decision. Stage 1 begins at the moment of physical death, but it's nothing like the dramatic event we imagine. Seth described it as waking up from a deep sleep. Suddenly you're aware, alert, and surprisingly relieved. The consciousness realizes it no longer needs to operate through the dense physical machinery of the body. One person Seth communicated with through Jane Roberts described it as finally being able to breathe after holding your breath underwater for decades. The relief is immediate and profound. But here's what fascinated Seth's students. This awakening happens whether someone dies peacefully or traumatically. The consciousness simply steps back from the physical experience and recognizes its broader identity. It's like an actor finishing a particularly demanding role and remembering who they really are beneath the character. Stage 2 is where things get really interesting. This is what Seth called the review period, and it has nothing to do with judgment or punishment. Instead, the soul examines its completed life with the same curiosity a scientist might study an experiment. Every choice, every relationship, every moment of growth or missed opportunity get reviewed not for condemnation but for understanding. Seth explained that this process can last anywhere from hours to days, depending on the soul's spiritual development. More evolved souls move through this review quickly because they've already been doing this kind of self-examination throughout their lives. Others need more time to process experiences they avoided understanding while alive. During this stage, the soul is still somewhat connected to the physical realm. It's processing earthly experiences and relationships, which means it's still partially anchored to material existence. This becomes crucial when we get to cremation's role. Stage 3 presents what Seth called the choice period. This is where souls decide whether to progress to higher dimensions of existence or remain earthbound for a while longer, and this is where many souls get stuck. Seth was adamant that strong material attachments often cause souls to linger in this stage far longer than necessary. They remain partially tethered to physical existence, not just emotionally but energetically. They hover around familiar places, try to communicate with living family members, and struggle to fully embrace their expanded consciousness. Now here's Seth's shocking insight about cremation. It serves as what he called a symbolic gateway that helps souls move through stages 4 through 7 with remarkable efficiency. Seth explained that the fire element in cremation doesn't just consume physical matter, it breaks energetic to the physical form that would otherwise keep the soul partially anchored during the slow decomposition process. While a buried body gradually returns to Earth over months or years, cremation completes this transition in hours. Think about what this means. Instead of having energetic threads still connecting consciousness to slowly decaying matter, cremation severs these connections cleanly and completely. The soul is free to progress through the remaining stages without looking back. Seth provided documented evidence for this through multiple sessions. Families who chose cremation consistently reported clearer, more coherent communication with their deceased loved ones compared to those who chose burial. The difference wasn't subtle, it was dramatic. One particularly compelling case involved twin brothers who died within weeks of each other. One was buried according to family tradition, the other was cremated per his specific wishes. The family reported that communication with the cremated brother was immediate, clear, and comforting. Communication with the buried brother remained confused and agitated for months. Seth's explanation was straightforward. Decaying physical matter creates what he called static in spiritual communication. The consciousness remained partially focused on the deteriorating body, dividing its attention between earthly concerns and spiritual progression. Cremation eliminates this distraction entirely, freeing the soul's energy for clear interaction with the living. This validates something ancient cultures understood intuitively. Fire has been recognized as a purification element across civilization for thousands of years. Hindu traditions, Viking customs, and countless other cultures used fire specifically to help souls transition completely from physical to spiritual existence. Seth's teaching provides the mechanism behind these ancient practices. Fire doesn't just symbolize purification, it actually accomplishes energetic purification by completely severing the soul's connection to physical matter. But what about the fear many people have about cremation? Seth addressed this directly using what became known as the house and person analogy. He explained that consciousness relates to the physical body the same way a person relates to their house. When you move out of a house, you don't suffer when that house is later demolished or renovated. Your identity and well-being exist completely independently of what happens to the structure you once occupied. The same principle applies after death. Consciousness is completely independent of physical matter. What happens to the body after consciousness departs affects the soul about as much as what happens to your childhood bedroom affects you as an adult living in a different city. Seth emphasized that this understanding should guide end-of-life decision. The choice between burial and cremation shouldn't be made from fear, cultural pressure, or blind tradition. It should be made with spiritual understanding of what actually serves the soul's progression. For families making these decisions, Seth's teachings offer profound clarity. If you want to help your loved one's consciousness transition as smoothly as possible, cremation provides a clean, energetic break that serves their spiritual development. This doesn't mean burial is wrong. It simply means cremation offers advantage that most people never consider. Understanding these 7 stages changes how we think about death entirely. It's not an ending. It's a transition with specific phase that can be navigated more or less efficiently depending on the choices we make. The most haunting case Seth ever described to Jane Roberts involved a woman from Norfolk, Virginia, whose husband died instantly in a head-on collision on Interstate 64. Within 18 hours, his body was cremated according to what the family thought were his wishes. But 3 weeks later, this grieving widow was having such disturbing dreams that she sought out Jane Roberts for a session with Seth. What Seth revealed changed everything we thought we knew about the timing of cremation and the soul's transition process. The woman's husband, according to Seth, was experiencing what could only be described as profound disorientation. Not pain, Seth was very clear about this, but a kind of consciousness confusion that happens when the physical form is destroyed before the soul has fully separated from its earthly identity. Imagine waking up in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, except the country is an entirely different dimension of existence, and your familiar reference point, your physical body, has vanished before you were ready to let it go. This is what Seth called the critical timing window, and most people have never heard of it because traditional religions and modern funeral practices completely ignore the soul's actual transition process. Seth explained that consciousness doesn't flip a switch at the moment of death. Instead, there's what he termed the borderland period, a crucial transition phase that can last anywhere from 3 days to several weeks, depending on how the person died and their spiritual preparation. During this time, the departing soul maintains subtle energetic connections to the physical form while gradually adjusting to non-physical existence. Think of it like learning to walk after being in a wheelchair your entire life. The soul needs time to understand its new reality, to release its identification with the physical body, and to orient itself in dimensions of existence that operate by completely different rules than the material world. The Norfolk woman's husband had died suddenly. One moment he was driving home from work, thinking about dinner plans, and the next moment his consciousness was thrust into the afterlife with no preparation whatsoever. Seth revealed that sudden death, whether from accident, heart attacks, or other unexpected causes, requires significantly more adjustment time because the soul wasn't mentally or spiritually prepared for the transition. This is completely different from gradual death, where someone dies slowly from illness or old age. In those cases, Seth explained, consciousness often begins separating from the physical body weeks or even months before actual death occur. The person might seem to be slipping away or talking to deceased relatives. They're actually beginning their transition while still alive, which makes the final separation much smoother. But sudden death catches the soul off guard, and here's where cremation timing becomes absolutely critical. When the Norfolk man's body was cremated within 19 hours, his soul was still in those early stages of the borderland period. He could sense what was happening to his physical form, but Seth described it as experiencing something like remembering a dream, not physical sensation, but a kind of awareness that his anchor to the material world was being severed before he was ready. The result was 3 weeks of confusion and disorientation that manifested in his wife's dreams. She was receiving his distressed mental communications, though she didn't understand what was happening. Seth had to provide specific guidance to help this soul complete its transition and find peace in its new existence. This case revealed Seth's most important teaching about cremation timing. There's an optimal window that serves the soul's highest good. Seth recommended allowing at least 72 hours after death before cremation, particularly in cases of sudden death. This gives consciousness time to fully separate from physical identification and begin adjusting to non-physical reality. The soul can still be aware of what happens to the body during this period, but it experiences this awareness from an increasingly detached perspective as the separation process completes. However, Seth also warned against waiting too long. Extended delays, weeks or months, can actually create problems in the opposite direction, where the soul maintains earthbound attachments and has difficulty moving forward in its spiritual development. The physical body becomes like a chain holding consciousness back from its natural evolution. The ideal timing allows for complete separation without prolonged attachment. Most souls, according to Seth, complete their initial adjustment within 3 to 7 days, making this the optimal window for cremation. But here's what's truly remarkable about Seth's teachings. He provided specific practices that families can use to help souls during this transition period, regardless of cremation timing. Focused, loving thoughts directed toward the deceased person actually accelerate the adjustment process. Seth explained that consciousness is immediately responsive to love and positive mental communication after death. Family members can literally help by sending thoughts of love, forgiveness, and encouragement for the soul to move forward into its new existence. Prayer works too, but not the kind that tries to hold the person back or beg them to return. Seth taught that the most helpful prayer focus on the soul's continued growth and happiness in its new dimension of existence. Direct mental communication is perhaps the most powerful tool. Simply thinking loving thoughts toward the deceased person, sharing memory, expressing gratitude, or even explaining what's happening with their physical body can provide tremendous comfort and guidance during the transition period. The Norfolk woman, once she understood what was happening, was able to communicate directly with her husband's soul and help him complete his adjustment. Within days, her disturbing dreams stopped and were replaced by peaceful communications that gradually faded as he moved fully into his new existence. This reveals something profound about death and cremation. The family's understanding and emotional support actually matters more than perfect timing. A soul surrounded by loving, aware family members will adjust more quickly to any cremation timing than a soul whose family is trapped in grief, denial, or ignorance about the transition process. Seth also noted that people who lived spiritually aware lives typically adjust much more quickly to death and are far less affected by cremation timing. Someone who spent their lifetime understanding consciousness, practicing meditation, or exploring spiritual development already knows they're more than just their physical body. When death comes, the transition feels natural rather than shocking. For modern families facing these decisions, Seth's teachings offer practical guidance that can transform how we approach death and cremation. Instead of rushing to dispose of the body or clinging to it indefinitely, we can make timing decisions based on the soul's actual needs and the circumstances of death. If you're facing these decisions for a loved one, consider not just legal requirements and family logistics, but the spiritual transition happening beyond physical death. Your awareness and love can make all the difference in helping a soul find peace in its new existence. Now we come to perhaps the most profound aspect of Seth's teachings on cremation, how the complete destruction of the physical form serves as a spiritual catalyst that literally breaks the chain binding souls to material existence. When Seth spoke about earthly attachments, he wasn't just referring to our emotional connections to loved ones or favorite places. He described something far more fundamental, what he called energetic root systems that develop between consciousness and physical matter during our lifetime. Think of it like this. Every cell in your body carries not just biological information, but psychic imprints of your thoughts, emotions, and experiences. These imprints create invisible threads that tether your consciousness to the material plane. During one particularly revealing session in 1971, Seth explained how these attachments form. The soul becomes accustomed to filtering reality through flesh, bone, and neural pathways. Even after death, if the physical form remains intact, these familiar patterns continue to draw the consciousness back, like a plant still trying to grow toward light through a window that no longer exists. This is where cremation becomes spiritually revolutionary. Seth taught that the fire doesn't just consume tissue and bone, it performs what he called energetic severance. The complete transformation of matter into ash and energy creates an unmistakable signal to the Pru's departed consciousness. Your physical chapter is definitively closed. No gradual decay, no lingering cellular structure to anchor awareness, just complete, irreversible transformation. I remember reading about a case Seth described involving two brothers who died within months of each other. The first brother was buried according to family tradition, while the second had specifically requested cremation. Seth reported that the cremated brother achieved what he termed conscious release within days of his death, while the buried brother spent months in what Seth called gravitational confusion, repeatedly attempting to reconnect with his decomposing form. The cremated brother, Seth explained, quickly recognized the impossibility of returning to physical form and redirected his energy toward understanding his new state of existence. The buried brother remained psychically tethered to his slowly changing body, creating unnecessary suffering and delaying his spiritual progress. But Seth's most fascinating insight concerned the purification process itself. He revealed that fire doesn't just destroy, it transforms energy from one state to another. When the physical body undergoes cremation, Seth taught that limiting beliefs and emotional patterns literally stored in cellular memory get released and transformed. Think of it as a cosmic reset button for consciousness. During life, we accumulate what Seth called psychic debris, outdated fears, restrictive thought patterns, and emotional wounds that become embedded in our very cells. Traditional burial preserves these patterns along with the physical form. Cremation, however, forces on immediate energetic transformation that helps consciousness shed these limitations. Seth described watching souls emerge from the cremation process with what he called spiritual clarity, freed from the mental fog that often accompanies death. These souls demonstrated remarkable efficiency in their between-life processing, quickly reviewing their completed incarnation and beginning preparation for their next physical experience. The speed of this transformation often correlates with the soul's spiritual maturity. Seth observed that individuals who consciously choose cremation during their lifetime typically show advanced understanding of consciousness as separate from physical form. They've already begun the detachment process while alive, making their post-death transition remarkably smooth. Consider the deeper implications here. Seth taught that our method of body disposal actually reflects our spiritual development level. Those drawn to elaborate preservation methods, ornate caskets, embalming, permanent often demonstrate stronger attachment to material existence and physical identity. Those choosing cremation frequently show greater comfort with impermanence and change. This doesn't make one choice morally superior to another, but Seth emphasized that cremation aligns with the natural spiritual impulse toward growth and transformation. He compared it to a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. The old form must be completely left behind for the new stage of existence to begin. For families making these decisions, Seth offered profound guidance. When cremation is chosen with understanding and proper intention, recognizing it as a gift to help their loved one's spiritual journey, the process becomes a sacred act of release. Family members who approach cremation with this consciousness often report feeling a sense of completion and peace that facilitates their own healing. Seth also revealed fascinating patterns regarding reincarnation timing. Souls experiencing cremation typically return to physical life more quickly because they complete their between-life processing more efficiently. Without energetic attachment to decomposing matter, they can focus entirely on spiritual review, planning, and preparation for their next incarnation. The contrast becomes even more striking when examining souls who remain earthbound due to strong physical attachment. Seth described cases where consciousness lingered near burial sites for years, unable to fully accept the death of the physical form. These souls often required extensive spiritual assistance to achieve the release that cremation facilitates naturally. Understanding these teachings transform how we view cremation from a simple practical choice to a profound spiritual decision. When we choose cremation with conscious intention, whether for ourselves or our loved ones, we're actively supporting the soul's natural progression towards its next phase of growth and learning. Seth's wisdom reveals cremation as perhaps the most compassionate gift we can offer a departing soul, the freedom to fully embrace their expanded existence without the gravitational pull of material attachment holding them back. Here's something that completely challenges what most people believe about staying connected with loved ones after death. When Jane Roberts channeled Seth back in the 1960 secondes and 70 secondes, her shared insights about spirit communication that turned conventional wisdom upside down. According to Seth's teaching, cremation doesn't separate us from our deceased family members. It actually makes communication with them clearer and stronger. This goes against everything we've been told about maintaining connections with the dead. Most people assume that preserving the physical body somehow preserves the spiritual connection. Seth explained that the opposite is true, and the reason involves what he called energetic interference from decomposing physical matter. Think about it this way. Seth taught that when a body is buried and begins its slow decomposition process, part of the soul's energy remains tethered to that decaying physical form. It's not that the soul is trapped, but rather that a portion of its energetic attention gets pulled back toward the gradually breaking down organic matter. Seth described this as creating a kind of static in the dimensional barrier between the physical world and the spiritual realm. The mechanism works like this. As buried body decompose over months and years, the cellular breakdown creates energetic disturbance. These disturbances interfere with the soul's attempts to reach through the dimensional barrier to make contact with living family members. It's similar to trying to tune into a radio station while there's electrical interference nearby. The signal gets through, but it's weak, unclear, and often missed entirely. Seth contrasted this with what happens during cremation. The complete and immediate transformation of physical matter through intense heat frees all of the soul's energy for spiritual communication and progression. Without any decomposing matter to create energetic static, the soul can focus its full attention on communicating with loved ones and advancing in its spiritual development. One documented case Seth provided involved a family in Virginia Beach whose teenage daughter had died in a car accident. The family chose cremation, and within weeks, they began receiving what Seth described as remarkably clear communication from their daughter. She appeared in dreams with specific guidance about family decisions, created obvious synchronicities to let them know she was present during important moments, and even influenced electronic devices in ways that matched her personality when she was alive. Seth explained that this level of clear communication was possible because all of the daughter's spiritual energy was available for contact attempts. There was no energetic anchor pulling part of her attention back to a slowly decomposing body in a cemetery plot. Her consciousness could fully engage with the process of reaching across dimensional boundaries to comfort and guide her grieving family. The types of after-death communication that Seth described fall into several categories, and cremation enhances each one. Dream visitations become more vivid and memorable because the soul can invest more energy into creating these experiences. Signs and synchronicities appear more frequently and obviously because there's no competing energetic drain. Even intuitive connections, those moments when family members suddenly think of their loved one or feel their presence, become stronger and more reliable. For families wanting to maintain ongoing connections with deceased relatives, Seth provided specific guidance about creating receptive mental states. He emphasized that living family members need to approach spirit communication with what he called relaxed expectancy, being open to contact without desperately demanding it. Meditation, particularly in quiet space associated with the deceased person, creates optimal conditions for receiving communication attempt. Seth also recommended direct mental dialogue. Simply talking to the deceased family member, either out loud or mentally, creates an energetic bridge that makes communication easier. The key is maintaining emotional openness while avoiding the grief-driven desperation that can actually block spiritual contact. Many people worry that cremation somehow erases their loved one's spiritual presence or makes them less available for connection. Seth's teaching directly contradicts these fears with evidence from hundreds of documented cases. He explained that the soul's essence, personality, and love for family members remain completely intact, regardless of what happens to the physical body. In fact, cremation removes the one factor that can interfere with ongoing spiritual connection. The enhanced communication abilities that result from cremation serve both the deceased and the living. For the soul, being able to provide clear guidance and comfort to grieving family members fulfills what Seth described as a natural desire to continue caring for loved ones. For the living family, receiving obvious signs of continued existence and ongoing love significantly helps with the grief process and spiritual development. Seth taught that these communication benefits extend across multiple generations. When family members choose cremation, they're not just enhancing their own ability to communicate after death, they're creating a family tradition that strengthens spiritual connections for children and grandchildren. Over time, this builds what Seth called generational spiritual bridges that make ongoing family connections across the dimensional barrier increasingly clear and reliable. If you're facing end-of-life decisions for yourself or a family member, consider how cremation might actually enhance rather than diminish your ongoing spiritual connections. Seth's teachings suggest that choosing cremation is choosing clear air communication, stronger signs of continued existence, and more obvious guidance from the other side. Seth explained that as more people understand these principles, human society develops stronger connections between the physical and spiritual dimensions. This enhanced communication network benefits everyone by providing clear guidance from those who have transitioned to spiritual existence, while maintaining their love and concern for those still in physical form. When Seth described cremation, he wasn't talking about destruction. He was revealing something far more profound, a process of conscious energy transformation that most people completely misunderstand. Think about this: everything you see around you, your body, this room, the chair you're sitting in. Seth taught that all of this is consciousness temporarily organized into what we call matter. Your physical form isn't separate from your awareness. It's your consciousness expressing itself in a specific, focused way. When cremation occurs, you're witnessing consciousness returning to its more fluid, expansive state. This changes everything about how we understand what happens during the cremation process. Seth explained that fire doesn't destroy consciousness, it liberates it. The intense heat accelerates a transformation that would normally take years through decomposition. But here's what makes this remarkable: the soul doesn't just passively observe this process. According to Seth, the departing consciousness actively participates in watching its physical form return to pure energy. I've studied Seth's sessions where he described this in detail, and what struck me was his emphasis on fire as a transformative element that human cultures have recognized for millennia. Ancienne civilization understood something we've forgotten. that fire possessed spiritual properties beyond its physical characteristics. The Greeks spoke of the sacred flame. Hindu traditions describe fire as a bridge between worlds, and countless cultures have used fire in spiritual ceremonies specifically because it facilitates transitions between different states of being. Seth validated this ancient wisdom by explaining the actual mechanics involved. He described how the intense heat and brilliant light of cremation creates what he called dimensional doorways. These aren't mystical concepts, they're specific, energetic conditions that make it easier for the consciousness to move between physical and non-physical realities. The temperature and light frequency generated during cremation literally opens pathways that assist the soul's transition. But here's where Seth's teaching becomes even more fascinating. He explained that the consciousness, which had been organized as your physical body, doesn't disappear. It rejoins the larger field of awareness from which it originally emerged. Think of it like water returning to the ocean. The individual wave doesn't cease to exist. It becomes part of something infinitely larger while retaining its essential nature. This process mirrors what we're discovering in quantum physics about the fundamental nature of reality. Consciousness appears to be the primary substrate from which physical matter emerge, not the other way around. When cremation occurs, you're witnessing this universal principle in action, organized consciousness returning to its source state. Seth taught that witnessing or choosing cremation can be profoundly meaningful for both the deceased and their living family members. For the departing soul, it provides a clear, dramatic transition that aligns with their natural desire to move beyond physical limitations. Many souls, according to Seth, are eager to explore expanded states of awareness and find the gradual decomposition process unnecessarily prolonging. For family members present during cremation, Seth described it as witnessing a powerful demonstration of consciousness's fundamental nature. You're seeing direct evidence that physical form is temporary while awareness continues. This can be deeply healing for those struggling with grief, providing tangible proof that their loved one's essential self transcends physical existence. The speed and completeness of cremation also serves another purpose, Seth identified. Many souls carry attachments to their physical form that can interfere with their spiritual progress. We discussed this in earlier sections, how these earthly attachments can delay reincarnation and spiritual development. The thorough transformation of cremation helps dissolve these connections more efficiently than gradual decomposition. Seth specifically mentioned the spiritual significance of the light produced during cremation. This isn't just heat and flame, it represents the soul's emergence into greater illumination and understanding. The brilliant light generated mirrors the expanded awareness the consciousness is moving toward. In many of Seth's sessions, he described how souls experience this light as welcoming and familiar, not frightening or painful. What's remarkable is how Seth's revelations about cremation provide a framework that bridges spiritual wisdom and emerging scientific understanding. Quantum physicists are discovering that consciousness and energy are far more fundamental than previously thought. The idea that matter is organized consciousness temporarily expressing itself in physical form aligns with cutting-edge theories about the nature of reality. This scientific validation matters because it gives us confidence in Seth's other teachings about cremation. When he describes fire as liberating consciousness rather than destroying it, we can understand this within a broader context of how energy and awareness actually function at the most basic levels of existence. If you're considering cremation for yourself or a loved one, Seth's teaching suggests this choice supports the soul's natural transition process rather than hindering it. The fire serves consciousness by providing a swift, complete transformation that annors the temporary nature of physical form, while celebrating the eternal nature of awareness itself. Understanding cremation as energy transformation rather than destruction fundamentally changes how we approach death and dying. It removes fear and replaces it with recognition of a natural, beneficial process that consciousness has designed for its own liberation and continued growth. Here's something remarkable that Seth taught about death. Your soul actually participates in choosing when and how you'll die. Not in some predetermined, fatalistic way, but as an active participant in your own spiritual evolution. This completely changes how we think about cremation, because if you find yourself drawn to cremation as your preferred choice, Seth suggests this may be your soul's wisdom recognizing what will best serve your continued development beyond physical existence. I've studied thousands of Seth sessions, and what strikes me most about his guidance on preparing for death is how practical and empowering it is. He doesn't present death as something that happens to you, but as a transition you can consciously participate in creating. When it comes to cremation specifically, Seth emphasized that the more spiritually prepared you are during life, the less the timing of cremation matters because developed souls adjust rapidly to non-physical existence anyway. Think about what spiritual preparation actually means in Seth's framework. He consistently pointed to three key areas: meditation or inner exploration, genuine service to others, and developing your psychic abilities. These aren't abstract spiritual practices. They're specific ways of expanding your consciousness beyond physical boundaries while you're still alive. The person who has spent years in meditation, who has genuinely served others without expectation of return, who has developed their intuitive abilities, this person has already begun the process of loosening their exclusive identification with physical reality. Seth explained that such individuals often prefer cremation because they intuitively understand they won't need the gradual adjustment period that burial provides. They've already done much of their spiritual homework, so to speak. The rapid release that cremation offers aligns with their readiness to fully embrace non-physical existence. But how do you know if you're spiritually prepared for cremation? Seth offered a fascinating diagnostic tool: examine your attachment to physical existence and material possession. This isn't about living in poverty or rejecting the material world, but about your relationship to these. Are you clinging to your house, your car, your jewelry as definitions of who you are? Do you feel genuine panic at the thought of losing your physical body? These intense attachments suggest you might benefit from burial's gentler transition process. On the other hand, if you can honestly say you love your physical life but aren't desperately attached to maintaining it forever, if you view your possessions as tools for experience rather than extensions of your identity, if you feel curious rather than terrified about what comes after death, these attitudes often correlate with souls who will thrive with cremation's accelerated release. I remember one particular Seth session where a woman asked about her elderly father's fear of cremation. Seth's response was illuminating. He suggested she explore whether her father's fear stemmed from genuine spiritual concern or from cultural conditioning about cremation being somehow violent or disrespectful. Seth emphasized that many cremation fear dissolve when people understand the actual spiritual mechanics we've been discussing. This brings up something crucial that Seth stressed repeatedly: the importance of discussing your cremation choice with family members from a place of spiritual understanding rather than cultural assumptions. Your decision about cremation can actually become a powerful teaching moment for your loved ones, demonstrating your trust in consciousness's survival beyond physical death. Seth suggested having these conversations while you're healthy and mentally clear, explaining not just what you want, but why you want it. Share your understanding of consciousness as independent from the physical body. Discuss your belief in survival after death. Help your family understand that choosing cremation isn't about rejecting the body you've loved, but about consciously participating in your soul's continued evolution. These conversations can be transformative for everyone involved. When family members understand that your cremation choice comes from spiritual wisdom rather than casual preference, they often find their own fears about death beginning to dissolve. Your conscious approach to dying becomes a gift to those who will continue living. But how do you actually connect with your own soul wisdom about post-death preference? Seth provided specific guidance here. He recommended regular meditation focused not on emptying your mind, but on asking direct questions. What serves my highest good after death? How can my death experience contribute to my soul's evolution? What choice about my body will best support my continued growth? Seth assured his students that this inner knowing exists within everyone. Sometimes the answer comes as a clear preference. You simply know you want cremation or burial. Sometimes it comes as imagery. Perhaps you see yourself as light expanding rapidly outward, suggesting cremation's quick release appeals to you. Sometimes it's more subtle, a sense of rightness or peace when you imagine one option over another. The key is trusting what emerges from genuine inner exploration rather than making decisions based on what you think you should want or what others expect from you. Seth also provided practical guidance about creating advanced directives that reflect spiritual understanding. Beyond the legal requirements, he suggested writing letters to your loved ones, explaining your spiritual perspective on death and your reasoning behind your choices. These letters can provide tremendous comfort to grieving family members and help them make decisions aligned with your soul's highest good if any unexpected situations arise. Here's what I find most profound about Seth's approach to preparing for death consciously. He taught that this preparation transforms your entire life experience, regardless of whether you ultimately choose cremation or burial. When you've genuinely prepared for death by developing spiritually, serving others, and exploring your consciousness, you naturally experience less fear and more focus on what truly matters. The person who has consciously prepared for their own death transition becomes someone who lives more fully, loves more openly, and serves more generously because they understand that consciousness continues beyond physical existence. This understanding, Seth suggested, is perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves and our world while we're still here in physical form. Your conscious choice about cremation becomes part of your spiritual legacy, a demonstration of trust in the continuity of consciousness, and a teaching tool for those who will follow after you. When you truly grasp what Seth revealed about consciousness surviving cremation, something profound shifts in how you experience your daily existence. This isn't just philosophical theory, it's practical wisdom that can revolutionize every aspect of your current life, from your relationships to your deepest sense of purpose. Seth made a startling observation about people who genuinely accept the temporary nature of physical existence. He noticed they naturally begin prioritizing spiritual development over material accumulation. Think about it: if you knew with absolute certainty that your consciousness would continue beyond this body, would you spend 40 years climbing a corporate ladder just to impress neighbors you barely know? Would you sacrifice meaningful relationships for a bigger house that you'll eventually leave behind anyway? This shift happens organically when Seth's cremation teachings sink in. You stop measuring success by your bank account or social media followers and start asking deeper questions. What spiritual gifts am I developing? How am I serving others' growth? What wisdom is my soul actually gaining from this incarnation? But here's where it gets really interesting. Seth explained that understanding consciousness continuity eliminates the fear-based thinking that keeps most people playing small. When you know, not just believe, but know that you're an eternal being having a temporary physical experience, you become willing to take spiritual risks that terrified you before. I've seen this transformation countless times. People who spent decades in soul-crushing jobs suddenly find the courage to pursue their authentic calling. Others finally speak their truth in relationships, even when it means difficult conversations. The fear of death that unconsciously drove so many life decisions simply dissolves when you understand what Seth revealed about consciousness and cremation. Seth taught that souls who accept reincarnation and consciousness continuity experience dramatically greater peace in their current lives. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for eternal spiritual growth rather than a threat to temporary physical comfort. That argument with your spouse? It's a chance to practice compassion and communication skills your soul will carry forward. That financial setback? An opportunity to discover inner resources and release attachment to material security. Seth recommended specific practices for integrating this death awareness into daily spiritual development. Regular meditation on consciousness and its relationship to physical form was central to his guidance. Not morbid contemplation of death, but joyful recognition of your true nature as awareness itself, temporarily focused through this particular body and personality. He suggested spending time each day consciously recognizing yourself as consciousness, experiencing physical form rather than a physical being, hoping to develop consciousness. This subtle shift in perspective changes everything. Your body becomes a temporary vehicle rather than your identity. Your thoughts become passing phenomena rather than ultimate truth. Your emotions become information rather than commands. This understanding naturally releases attachment to physical appearance, possessions, and social status. When you truly grasp that these are temporary aspects of one incarnation rather than your fundamental identity, the anxiety around aging, the compulsive shopping, the desperate need for others' approval, it all start to feel rather silly. Seth's cremation teachings revealed something beautiful about relationships too. When you understand that connections between souls transcend physical bodies, you stop trying to control or possess the people you love. Instead, you focus on spiritual connection and mutual growth. You ask different questions. How can we help each other evolve? What are we learning together? How can our relationship serve both souls' development? This doesn't make relationships less passionate or committed. It makes them more authentic and ultimately more satisfying. You love people for who they truly are as eternal being rather than for how they meet your temporary physical and emotional needs. Seth's teachings about post-death communication offer profound comfort for those grieving loved ones while inspiring greater spiritual openness in daily life. When you understand that consciousness continues and communication remains possible, death becomes transition rather than ending. This naturally motivates you to develop your own psychic sensitivity and spiritual awareness. Perhaps most importantly, conscious awareness of death and rebirth cycle creates healthy urgency around what truly matters. Seth emphasized that understanding consciousness continuity shouldn't make you passive about current life. It should inspire immediate action on your deepest spiritual purpose. Why wait to express love openly? Why postpone resolving conflict? Why delay pursuing your soul's calling? When you understand that this incarnation is precious precisely because it's temporary, you stop procrastinating on what matters most. Seth's revelations about cremation as spiritual purification can inspire powerful current life practices, just as fire release. Consciousness from physical attachment after death. You can consciously practice releasing limiting beliefs, healing emotional wounds, and preparing consciousness for continued evolution right now. This might involve forgiveness work that frees you from carrying resentment between lifetimes. It could mean developing unconditional love that transcends physical circumstances. Perhaps it's cultivating wisdom and compassion that will serve you in future incarnations. Living with Seth's understanding of eternal consciousness and temporary physical existence naturally leads to greater compassion. When you recognize that everyone around you is also an eternal soul having a temporary human experience, it becomes much easier to be patient with their struggles and supportive of their growth. The practical implications are enormous. Start each day by remembering your true nature as consciousness. Make decisions based on spiritual development rather than just physical comfort. Express love and gratitude immediately rather than waiting for perfect circumstances. Pursue your authentic purpose with the urgency it deserves. Seth's cremation teachings aren't just about what happens after death. They're about how to live more fully, love more deeply, and serve more effectively right now. When you truly understand that consciousness is eternal and this physical experience is a precious temporary opportunity, every moment becomes sacred, every relationship becomes meaningful, and every challenge becomes a gift for your soul's continued evolution. When you truly grasp what Seth revealed about consciousness surviving cremation, something profound shifts in how you approach every single day of your physical existence. This isn't just theoretical knowledge to file away. It's a complete reorientation toward living with what Seth called death consciousness, which paradoxically makes you more alive than you've ever been. Seth's teachings about cremation, eliminating the fear of bodily destruction, point to something much larger. Most people live in a constant state of unconscious death anxiety that colors every decision they make. You stay in jobs that drain your soul because you're terrified of financial insecurity. You avoid difficult conversation because you fear emotional pain. You postpone your dreams because you're afraid of failure. But when you genuinely understand that your consciousness is indestructible, that cremation simply accelerates your transition to expanded awareness, these fears lose their grip on your daily choices. The practical integration of this wisdom begins with what Seth described as developing spiritual sight while still in physical form. This isn't about having mystical visions. It's about recognizing the non-physical dimensions operating within ordinary experiences. When you're having a heated argument with someone, spiritual sight allows you to perceive the soul-level agreements you made, to challenge each other's growth. When you face a devastating loss, you can sense the larger patterns of consciousness, choosing specific experiences for expansion. Seth provided specific meditation techniques for strengthening this perception. He recommended spending time each day consciously separating your awareness from your physical sensations, not through denial or escapism, but through gentle observation of how your consciousness can focus beyond bodily experience. You might notice how your sense of identity persists even when you're completely absorbed in solving a complex problem or lost in creative flow. These moments offer glimpses of what Seth described as your natural state, consciousness temporarily using physical form rather than being trapped by it. This understanding transforms how you navigate life's inevitable challenges. Instead of seeing difficulties as meaningless suffering to be avoided at all costs, you begin recognizing them as precisely the experiences your consciousness shows for specific reasons. Seth emphasized that souls often select challenging circumstances, including the manner of their death, because these experiences offer the most rapid spiritual development. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. Rather, it means approaching obstacles with curiosity about what aspects of yourself they're designed to strengthen or reveal. One of Seth's most practical teachings involved developing ongoing communication with non-physical aspects of consciousness. This includes what he called your higher self, the broader identity that exists beyond your current personality. Regular dialogue with this expanded awareness provides guidance that transcends the limited perspective of physical existence. You might ask your higher self about career decisions, relationship challenges, or creative projects. Then pay attention to the insights that emerge through dreams, sudden knowing, or synchronistic events. Seth also taught methods for maintaining connection with deceased loved ones who have transitioned beyond physical form. Understanding that cremation facilitates their movement into expanded consciousness makes these communications more natural and less fraught with grief-driven desperation. You're not trying to hold on to their physical identity, but rather connecting with their continuing evolution. This ongoing relationship with those who have died helps maintain awareness of life's spiritual dimensions while you're still incarnated. Perhaps most importantly, Seth's revelations about cremation and energy transformation encourage what he called living lightly in physical existence. This means fully engaging with earthly responsibilities and relationships without the heavy attachment that comes from believing physical form is all there is. You can pour yourself completely into your work, your family, your creative expressions, while maintaining the spacious awareness that these experiences are temporary adventures in consciousness rather than ultimate realities. This lighter approach doesn't diminish the significance of physical life, it actually enhances your capacity for love and service. When you're not desperately clinging to people and circumstance out of death anxiety, you can offer more authentic presence and support. Seth taught that souls who understand death as transformation naturally become more effective at helping others, because they're operating from expanded perspective rather than fear-based limitation. The ripple effects extend to how you make decisions about spiritual practices and life direction. Seth's insights about consciousness choosing its death circumstances suggest that your inner guidance about important choices carry deeper wisdom than surface-level preference. When you feel drawn towards specific spiritual practices, geographic locations, or relationship dynamics, these impulses may reflect your soul's awareness of what experiences will best serve your continued development. Sharing Seth's teachings with others require particular sensitivity, especially when people are struggling with death, anxiety, or grief. The key is approaching these conversations with genuine compassion rather than evangelical urgency. You might share your own experience of how understanding consciousness survival has affected your daily life, without insisting others adopt the same perspective. Seth emphasized that spiritual readiness varied tremendously among individuals, and forcing premature exposure to these concepts can create resistance rather than opening. The ultimate gift of integrating Seth's wisdom about cremation and consciousness is the freedom it provides for authentic living. When you know that death is a doorway rather than an ending, every day becomes an opportunity for conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. You can pursue relationships that challenge your growth rather than just comfort your ego. You can take creative risks that might fail spectacularly because you understand that failure is simply another form of learning. You can approach aging and physical changes with curiosity rather than terror because you know your essential identity transcends bodily limitations. Seth's final message about cremation points toward the deepest truth. Understanding death transforms not only how you die, but how you choose to live each precious day of physical existence. This knowledge inspires greater love, accelerated spiritual development, and more effective service to the eternal evolution of consciousness itself. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it,"